On the night Lena Hart set a candlelit anniversary dinner for two, her husband arrived 3 hours late, reeking of expensive perfume and carrying divorce papers like a victory banner. For 7 years, she'd played the devoted wife in their modest southern suburb, clipping coupons and building a life around his ambitions. He called their marriage 7 years of service before walking out to marry a banking heiress, convinced he was discarding a penniless nobody. What Miles Crow didn't know, the woman washing his dishes was Saraphina Vale, hidden heir to a billion-dollar empire, and she was about to reclaim every ounce of power he never knew she had. If you're ready to see how a woman buried her fortune for love, only to unleash it for justice, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The Tuesday morning, Lena Hart's carefully constructed world began its final collapse, started like any other, with the smell of burnt coffee and the sound of her husband's impatient footsteps overhead. She stood at the kitchen counter of their pale yellow ranch house on Magnolia Drive, sorting coupons into neat plastic envelopes while morning light filtered through gingham curtains she'd sewn herself. 7 years of this life. 7 years of choosing which brand of cereal cost 8 cents less, of volunteering at the library, of being exactly what Miles Crow needed her to be. Uncomplicated, grateful, and small. The house itself was a monument to that smallness. 1,200 square feet of carefully budgeted comfort in a neighborhood where everyone knew your business and brought casseroles when you were sick. Lena had chosen it deliberately, back when she still believed ordinary could be enough. Back when she thought love might taste sweeter without the weight of expectations that came with her real name. Saraphina Vale. Even thinking it sent a cold finger down her spine. Not fear exactly, but the muscle memory of a life she'd deliberately amputated. The name still appeared quarterly in Forbes' lists of the world's most powerful people, always with the notation, "declined to comment," beside the estimated net worth that made most small nations look poor. But that woman, cool, calculating, born into boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, had been carefully buried 7 years ago beneath layers of suburban camouflage so thick that even she sometimes forgot the truth. Almost. "Lena!" Miles's voice carried down the stairs with the edge it had developed over the past year. Sharp enough to cut, but not quite cruel enough to bleed. "Where's my blue tie? The silk one?" "Hanging in your closet," she called back, her voice automatically softening into the tone he preferred. Accommodating, pleasant, forgettable. Right side, next to the gray suit. She heard him moving above her, his expensive shoes, the ones she'd saved 3 months to buy him for his birthday, clicking against the hardwood she'd refinished herself one summer while he attended a critical conference in Miami. The conference where he'd first mentioned Celeste Barron's name casually, like it meant nothing. It had meant everything. Lena's hands stilled over the coupons. She'd become an expert at reading the spaces between Miles' words, the silences that spoke louder than his increasingly frequent absences. Celeste Barron, daughter of Vernon Barron, whose banking empire controlled enough capital to make politicians nervous and competitors extinct. Miles had been working on a major deal with Barron Financial for 8 months now, coming home later and later, his clothes carrying perfume that cost more per ounce than their monthly grocery budget. She'd tried not to notice, tried to believe in the man she'd married, the one who'd swept her off her feet at a charity gala she'd attended under her assumed name, the one who'd made her laugh with stories about his modest upbringing and big dreams. The one who hadn't known she could buy his dreams 1,000 times over and still have enough left to purchase the city they stood in. That man had been real once. She was almost sure of it. "Finally," Miles muttered, appearing in the kitchen doorway with the tie draped around his neck, leaving both ends hanging. A summons. For 7 years, Lena had tied his ties every morning, and somewhere along the way, it had stopped being intimacy and become obligation. She set down her coupons and crossed to him, her hands moving through the familiar Windsor knot while he scrolled through his phone, not looking at her. Up close, she could smell his cologne, the expensive bottle that had appeared in their bathroom 3 months ago, the one he'd laughed off as a client gift when she'd asked about it. "Big day?" she asked softly, watching her hands work. "Potentially." His eyes never left his screen. "Vernon's announcing a major expansion today. If everything goes right, I'll be heading the new division." "That's wonderful, Miles. I'm so proud of you." The words tasted like ash, but she'd learned to swallow ash and smile. That was what you did when you loved someone who was slowly learning not to love you back. We'll see. He finally glanced down at her, and something in his expression made her fingers falter on the silk. It was the way he looked at her lately, like she was furniture he'd grown tired of, useful but uninspiring. You got everything you need for the week? I might be staying late several nights? Of course. She finished the knot, smoothing it against his chest. I have my book club Thursday, but otherwise I'll be here. Book club. He said it like she'd announced plans to watch paint dry. Right. Very important. There was a time when he'd asked about her books, genuinely interested in her thoughts. There was a time when he'd called her brilliant, when her opinions had mattered to him. But that was before he'd started climbing, before he'd realized that the world he wanted entry to didn't care about brilliant wives who clipped coupons and drove 8-year-old sedans. They cared about wives who came with portfolios and pedigrees. I should go, Miles said, already turning away. Don't wait up tonight. This deal's at a critical stage. Miles? She caught his arm, hating the neediness in her voice, but unable to stop it. It's Tuesday. He stared at her blankly. We always have dinner together on Tuesdays, she continued, feeling something crack in her chest. It's our night, remember? For a moment, something almost like guilt flickered across his face. Almost. Then it hardened into impatience. Lena, I'm trying to build something here, something bigger than Tuesday night pot roast in a kitchen that's barely bigger than a closet. I thought you understood that. The words hung between them like a slap that hadn't quite landed. I do understand, she said quietly. I just miss you. Yeah, well. He pulled his arm free, checking his watch, the Rolex she'd given him for their 5th anniversary, bought with money carefully skimmed from her monthly allowance from the trust that legally didn't exist. Some of us are trying to make something of ourselves. Not everyone can be content with. He gestured vaguely at their kitchen, at her worn jeans and bare feet, at the life she'd built around him like a shrine. This. Then he was gone, the front door closing with a finality that echoed through the small house. Lena stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to his car pull away. Then she walked to the sink and gripped the counter, her knuckles white against the cheap laminate. In another life, in the life she'd abandoned, she would have made a single phone call and ended Miles Crow's career before lunch. Would have had a full dossier on Celeste Barron's family on her desk by dinner, complete with every skeleton in their impeccably decorated closets. Would have dismantled Vernon Barron's empire like a child's blocks, methodically and without mercy, just to prove a point. But that woman had been lonely. That woman had attended galas where everyone wanted something, dated men who saw dollar signs before they saw her face, lived in a penthouse that echoed with emptiness despite being filled with priceless things. So she'd run, created Lena Hart, complete with backstory, modest bank account, and a carefully constructed past that would survive any casual investigation. She'd wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen for herself, to build something real with someone who loved her for reasons that had nothing to do with the empire she'd inherited at 23 when her parents died in a plane crash over the Alps. The irony was almost funny. She'd hidden her billions to find authentic love, and found a man who was leaving her because she wasn't rich enough. Mrs. Hart? Lena jumped, spinning to find her neighbor, Carol Jensen, peering through the screen door with a concerned expression and a foil-covered dish. I'm sorry, honey. I didn't mean to startle you. Carol let herself in because that's what neighbors did on Magnolia Drive, setting the dish on the counter. I made too much banana bread and thought you might like some. Are you all right? You look pale. I'm fine, Lena said automatically, then felt tears prick her eyes because Carol Jensen was possibly the kindest person she'd ever met, and she was standing in Lena's kitchen offering carbs and compassion while Lena's marriage dissolved around her. Oh, sweetie. Carol's arms came around her before she could protest, smelling like vanilla and fabric softener. Men are idiots, every last one of them. What did Miles do? Nothing, Lena said into Carol's shoulder. Everything. I don't know. He's been working late a lot, Carol said carefully, pulling back to study Lena's face. Dan mentioned seeing his car at that new steakhouse downtown last week. The expensive one. He was with a woman. There it was, the truth she'd been avoiding, spoken aloud in her kitchen while banana bread cooled on the counter. Young thing, Carol continued, her voice gentle but firm. Blonde. Looked like money. I told Dan to mind his business, but then I thought, well, you're my friend. You should know. Thank you, Lena whispered. I suspected. What are you going to do? Lena thought about that question. In her old life, the answer would have been swift and surgical. But this life, this small, fragile life she'd built on hope and deliberate blindness, didn't have room for the woman she used to be. I don't know, she said honestly. Try to fix it, I guess. Try to remember why we fell in love. Carol's expression suggested she thought that ship had sailed, but she was too kind to say it. Instead, she squeezed Lena's hand. You're stronger than you know, honey, and you're worth more than how any man treats you. Don't forget that. After Carol left, Lena stood in her kitchen and made a decision. She would fight for her marriage. Not with weapons from her old life, but with the only tools Lena Hart had: persistence, patience, and the desperate hope that somewhere inside the ambitious stranger her husband had become, the man she'd married still existed. She spent the day cleaning house with an intensity that bordered on manic, scrubbing years of accumulated life from baseboards and windows until everything gleamed. She drove to the fancy grocery store across town, the one where she usually didn't shop because the prices made her invented budget ache, and bought ingredients for Miles' favorite meal: filet mignon, roasted potatoes with rosemary, the good wine. Their anniversary was 3 weeks away, but she couldn't wait that long. She would make tonight special, would remind him of who they'd been when they started this journey. By 6 o'clock, the table was set with the wedding china they never used. Candles flickered in the dimming light, and Lena had changed into the blue dress Miles had once said made her eyes look like sapphires. She'd even splurged on new lipstick, a deep red that felt like war paint. 6:30 came and went. She texted him. Surprise waiting at home. Come hungry. 7 o'clock. She reheated the potatoes. 7:30. The steaks went from perfect medium rare to tough. 8 o'clock. The candles burned down to stubs. At 8:45, her phone finally buzzed. Not a call. A text. Working late. Told you not to wait up. Lena stared at those 9 words until they blurred. Then she very carefully stood up, walked to the kitchen, and threw her phone into the sink. It didn't shatter the way she wanted it to. Nothing ever did. She left everything on the table, the cold food, the burned-down candles, the carefully constructed hope, and walked upstairs to their bedroom. Their bed was neatly made, the way she made it every morning after Miles left. His side still showed the impression of his body from the night before, a shallow indent that would disappear with the next washing. She lay down on her side, curled into herself, and let the truth settle into her bones. Her husband was having an affair. Her marriage was ending. And the life she'd built, this small, ordinary, supposedly real life, was a lie just as elaborate as the one she'd escaped. Somewhere in the city, in whatever expensive restaurant or hotel room Miles was occupying, he was probably laughing, probably feeling free, unburdened by the mediocre wife who didn't understand his ambitions, probably planning a future that had no room for a woman who bought day-old bread and mended her own clothes. He had no idea who she really was, no idea what she'd given up to be his wife, no idea that the woman currently crying into her pillow could destroy his precious dreams with a single phone call. But she wouldn't, because Saraphina Vale was dead and buried, and Lena Hart still believed in fighting fair. She just didn't know yet that Miles Crow had never believed in fighting fair at all. The next morning, Lena woke to an empty bed and a text that felt like a knife between her ribs. Need space to think. Staying at office apartment for a few days. Office apartment. The one-bedroom corporate rental that his company kept for out-of-town executives. Miles had never been an out-of-town executive. He'd been her husband, sleeping beside her every night for 7 years. Past tense. Had been. She got up mechanically, went through the motions of coffee and shower and clothes. The house felt different without his presence. Bigger, somehow, echoing with silence that used to feel peaceful, but now just felt empty. When she came downstairs, she found the dining room exactly as she'd left it. Cold steaks congealing on good china, candle wax pooled on the tablecloth, wilted flowers drooping in their vase. A museum to failed hope. She was clearing the table when her phone rang. Miles. Her heart leaped despite everything, because maybe, "We need to talk," he said without preamble. No greeting, no warmth, Just business. Okay, she said carefully. When do you want to? Today, noon. There's a cafe on Marshall Street. Bernard's. Bernard's. The place where they'd had their first date 7 years ago. Where he'd told her about his dreams and she'd fallen in love with his passion. Where everything had started. I'll be there, she said. He hung up without saying goodbye. Lena stood in her kitchen holding her phone, and something cold settled in her chest. This wasn't reconciliation. Reconciliation didn't happen at public cafes in the middle of the day. Reconciliation happened in living rooms and bedrooms, in private spaces where tears were allowed. This was an ending. She arrived at Bernard's 15 minutes early, took a table by the window, and ordered water she didn't drink. The cafe had changed since their first date, been renovated, made trendier, more expensive. But the bones were the same. She could still see them in the corner booth where Miles had reached across the table and taken her hand, his eyes full of wonder that someone like her would give him the time of day. If he'd only known. He arrived exactly at noon, wearing the suit she'd sent to the dry cleaners last week and carrying a leather messenger bag she didn't recognize. Expensive. New. He looked good. Better than good, actually. He looked like success, like a man who'd finally grown into the life he'd always wanted. He looked nothing like the man she'd married. Lena. He sat down across from her, not quite meeting her eyes. Thanks for coming. Of course. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Miles, about last night. Let me talk first. He set the messenger bag on the table between them like a barrier. I've been thinking a lot about us, about our marriage, about what I want from life. Each sentence landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of dread outward. I've changed, he continued, finally looking at her. I've grown. My career is taking off in ways I never imagined possible. Vernon Barron sees potential in me, real potential. He's offering me opportunities that could change everything. That's wonderful, Lena said carefully. I've always believed in you. I know you have, but... He paused, seeming to gather himself. Lena, you're stuck. We're stuck. This life, he gestured vaguely, encompassing their history, their home, their years together. It's too small for where I'm heading. The words were a scalpel, precise and devastating. We can grow together, she said, hating the pleading edge in her voice. Whatever you need, we can... I need someone who fits. The words came out harsh, then he softened them with visible effort. I need a partner who understands the world I'm entering. Someone who can stand beside me at charity galas and investor dinners. Someone who knows which fork to use and how to dress for these things. Someone whose family has connections that matter. Someone like Celeste Barron. His face confirmed everything before his mouth could catch up. How did you... Does it matter? Lena felt something inside her crystallize, harden. How long, Miles? 6 months. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. It just happened. We were working together, spending time together. She understands this world. She fits. And I don't. You're a wonderful person, Lena. You've been a good wife. But we want different things now. I need someone who can help me build an empire, not someone who's content clipping coupons in a 1,200-square-foot house. There it was, the truth beneath all the careful words. She wasn't enough because she'd deliberately made herself not enough, because she'd buried her empire to play house with a man who'd wanted her for all the wrong reasons anyway. Not for her mind or heart, but for her serviceability, her willingness to be small so he could feel big. What do you want, Miles? She asked quietly. He reached into the messenger bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I had my lawyer draw these up. I'm trying to be fair. Divorce papers. He'd brought divorce papers to the cafe where they'd fallen in love. I'm not asking for anything from you, he continued quickly, like that made this better. You can keep the house. It's in your name anyway. I've already moved my things to a new place. Celeste and we're getting married. Her family's throwing us an engagement party next month. Society page and everything. Lena took the envelope with numb fingers. Next month. I know it's fast, but when you know, right? He actually smiled, like he expected her to agree, like she might congratulate him on finding true love. You're really doing this. She heard her voice from far away, hollow. Throwing away 7 years. 7 years of service, he corrected, and the cruelty in those words took her breath away. That's what it's been, hasn't it? You serving me, playing house, being the good wife. But I need more than that now. I need someone who brings value to the table, someone whose last name opens doors. Something snapped inside her chest, not her heart breaking, but something deeper, the last thread connecting Lena Hart to the fantasy that any of this had been real. Vernon's already made me senior vice president, Miles continued, oblivious to the change happening across the table. Celeste and I are moving to the penthouse downtown, the one in the Meridian building. Do you know it? Probably not. It's got a wait list a mile long, but Vernon pulled strings. That's what family does when they believe in you. The Meridian building, Saraphina, had owned that building for 6 years, had sold it to a development group last year as part of restructuring her real estate portfolio. The penthouse Miles was bragging about existed because she'd approved the floor plans. I'm sorry it worked out this way, Miles said, standing. I really am. You deserve someone who wants this small life. Someone who will be happy with Tuesday dinners and library book clubs. That's just not me anymore. He left cash on the table for her water, exact change, not a penny more, and walked out of Bernard's cafe without looking back. Lena sat there for a long time, the divorce papers heavy in her lap, watching the life she'd built turn to ash. Around her, people ordered lattes and chatted about ordinary problems, unaware that something monumental had just shattered. Finally, she opened the envelope. The papers were professionally done, thorough. Miles's lawyer had been efficient, community property divided, which meant nothing since they had nothing. The house to her, his pension to him. Clean, simple, over. She found the page requiring her signature and stared at the line. One signature and Lena Hart would be free. Free to go back to being nobody, alone in a house full of memories that had turned poisonous. Or, the thought came quietly, but once it arrived, it filled every corner of her mind. Or Saraphina Vale could come back. The woman she'd been, powerful, calculating, unstoppable, hadn't disappeared. She'd only been sleeping, buried under layers of deliberate ordinariness. But she was still there, waiting. And she was very, very angry. For 7 years, Lena had played fair, had chosen love over power, authenticity over advantage. She'd hidden her billions to find something real, and instead found a man who was leaving her for not being rich enough. The irony would be funny if it didn't hurt so much. Miles thought he was walking away from a nobody, thought Celeste Barron's family connections would open the doors he craved, thought he'd traded up, moved on, won. He had no idea he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. Lena pulled out her phone, the new one she'd bought to replace the one she'd thrown in the sink, and stared at the screen. She hadn't made this call in 7 years. Wasn't even sure the number still worked, but some things were permanent, built to last no matter how long you stayed away. Her finger hovered over the contact labeled RS Emergencies Only. Rafael Soria, Chief Legal Counsel of the Vale Fortune, the man who'd helped her disappear 7 years ago and promised to be there the day she decided to return. 7 years of playing small, 7 years of pretending, 7 years of being grateful for scraps from a man who'd never deserved her in the first place. Enough. Lena Hart took one last look at the divorce papers, at the signature line that would end this chapter forever. Then she dialed Raphael's number and waited. He answered on the second ring, his voice exactly as she remembered it, smooth, professional, loyal. Saraphina, I was wondering when you'd call. Just hearing her real name sent electricity down her spine. Not Lena, not the small, apologetic woman who'd spent 7 years making herself invisible. Saraphina. Raphael, she said, and her voice came out different, colder, sharper, the voice of a woman who'd commanded boardrooms before she could legally drink. I need you to initiate Protocol A. Us silence. Then, are you certain? Once we begin, I'm certain. She looked out the cafe window, watching Miles' car pull away from the curb, watching him drive toward his new life, completely unaware that he'd just triggered his own destruction. It's time to come home. Understood. I'll have preliminary reports within 24 hours. Full intelligence package within 72. What's the primary target? Lena thought about Miles, about Celeste Barron, about Vernon Barron's empire built on connections and old money. Thought about the smug confidence in Miles' voice when he'd talked about their engagement party, their penthouse, their future. Everything, she said quietly. I want to know everything about Miles Crow, Celeste Barron, and Barron Financial. Every deal, every connection, every skeleton in every closet. And Raphael, start with real estate. I want to know who owns the Meridian building now. She could hear the smile in his voice. Welcome back, Ms. Vale. We've missed you. After she hung up, Lena sat in the cafe for another hour, drinking coffee that grew cold while she methodically planned the next phase of her life. Not revenge. That was too simple, too emotional. This would be justice. Systematic, thorough, and absolutely devastating. Miles had called their marriage 7 years of service, like she'd been the hired help, like her love had been labor he'd paid for with his presence. He was about to learn what 7 years of her service was actually worth. But first, she had to bury Lena Hart as thoroughly as she'd once buried Saraphina Vale. Had to clear the house of every trace of Miles Crow, every memory of the life she'd built on false hope. Had to prepare for the resurrection of the woman who'd walked away from power because she'd believed in something better. She'd been wrong. Power hadn't been the problem. She had been powerful and lonely, yes, but that was because she'd been surrounded by the wrong people. By users and social climbers, and people who saw her fortune before they saw her face. People exactly like Miles Crow. The difference was, when Saraphina Vale surrounded herself with users, she'd known exactly what they were and kept them at arm's length. She'd been lonely but not deluded. Lena Hart had been deluded and called it love. Never again. Lena signed the divorce papers right there in the cafe, her signature swift and certain. Let Miles think he'd won. Let him marry his banking heiress and throw his society party and move into his Meridian penthouse. Let him build his dreams on a foundation he thought was solid. She would wait, patient and thorough, while Raphael compiled the intelligence she needed. Would learn every vulnerability in Miles' new world, every crack in the Barron family armor. Would study them the way a surgeon studies anatomy. So when she finally cut, she'd know exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage with minimal waste. Miles had wanted someone whose family had connections that mattered, someone whose last name opened doors. Well, the name Saraphina Vale didn't just open doors, it owned them. And by the time she was finished, Miles Crow would understand exactly what he'd thrown away, who he'd underestimated, and how completely he'd destroyed himself the moment he'd looked at his wife and seen nothing worth keeping. She gathered the signed divorce papers, left the cafe, and drove home through streets that suddenly felt different. The small yellow house on Magnolia Drive looked the same from the outside, modest, forgettable, ordinary. But as Lena pulled into the driveway and sat in her aging sedan, she saw it clearly for the first time in 7 years. It was a cage she'd built herself. A pretty cage, comfortable even. But still a cage. Time to break free. She went inside and started with Miles' closet, methodically packing every suit, every tie, every expensive shoe into boxes. The physical work felt good, cleansing. She was exorcising a ghost, erasing evidence of a marriage that had been dead long before he'd walked out. By midnight, 23 boxes lined her garage, ready for donation. The house felt bigger without his things in it. Emptier, yes, but also full of possibility. Her phone buzzed. Raphael. Preliminary report attached. Call me when you've reviewed. Lena opened the file on her laptop and began to read. Within minutes, she was smiling, not with joy, but with the cold satisfaction of a chess player who'd just seen 20 moves ahead. Miles and Celeste thought they were building an empire. They had no idea they were actually building a house of cards, and Saraphina Vale was about to start blowing. Gently at first, then with hurricane force. Let the game begin. The preliminary report Raphael sent contained 47 pages of information that would have taken most people weeks to compile. He'd done it in 18 hours, which was exactly why Saraphina had kept him on retainer even during her 7-year disappearance. She read it twice, making notes in the margins the way she used to, her mind cataloging vulnerabilities and opportunities with the precision of a machine that had merely been powered down, not dismantled. Miles Crow's meteoric rise at Barron Financial wasn't quite the merit-based success story he'd probably told himself. Vernon Barron had been positioning him deliberately, grooming him not as a protege but as a future son-in-law. Every promotion, every opportunity, every door that had opened, all of it had been orchestrated the moment Celeste had decided she wanted him. The timeline was almost funny. Celeste had attended a corporate mixer 8 months ago where Miles had been schmoozing potential clients. According to Raphael's sources, she'd pointed him out to her father that very night with the words, "I want that one," like she was selecting a handbag. Vernon, who'd built his empire partly by indulging his daughter's whims and partly by recognizing useful tools when he saw them, had made it happen. Miles thought he'd earned his success through talent and hard work. He had no idea he'd been selected, acquired, and deployed like any other asset in the Baron portfolio. Saraphina almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The rest of the report detailed the Baron family's business operations with the kind of thoroughness that came from having unlimited resources and 7 years of pent-up motivation. Vernon Baron ran a tight ship. His banking empire was legitimate, profitable, and largely scandal-free on the surface. But Raphael had found the cracks. Because there were always cracks when you knew where to look. Aggressive lending practices that skirted regulatory lines. Political donations that bought favorable treatment. A pattern of acquiring smaller competitors through tactics that were legal but barely ethical. Nothing explosive, but plenty that would make investors nervous if it became public knowledge. And then there was the Meridian building sale. Saraphina smiled when she read that section. The development group that had purchased it from her was actually a subsidiary of Baron Financial, hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies. Vernon had been quietly expanding into real estate development, likely planning to flip the property for double what he'd paid once the neighborhood finished gentrifying. The penthouse Miles was so proud of? He was essentially living in a property his future father-in-law owned, in a building Saraphina had sold for strategic reasons Vernon probably didn't even understand. The symmetry was almost poetic. She closed the laptop and looked around her small kitchen. Tomorrow, contractors would arrive to pack everything she owned, which wasn't much, since Lena Hart had lived simply by design. She'd already arranged for the house to be cleaned, staged, and listed with a premium realtor. It would sell quickly in this neighborhood, and the proceeds would go to the women's shelter where she'd volunteered for 6 years. Lena Hart would vanish as completely as she'd appeared, leaving nothing behind but fading memories and a generous, anonymous donation. Meanwhile, Saraphina Vale would resurrect herself in Manhattan, where she maintained a penthouse that made the Meridian building look modest. A penthouse that had sat empty for 7 years, maintained by a staff who'd been paid generously to keep it ready for her return. Her phone rang. Raphael, right on schedule. "Did you review the preliminary?" he asked. "Thoroughly. I need the full intelligence package by Friday, and I want you to activate the legal team. All of them." "The entire firm?" Raphael's voice carried a note of satisfaction. He'd been running the Vale legal operations on autopilot for 7 years, handling the trust and investments with meticulous care. But Saraphina could hear the excitement underneath his professional tone. This was what he'd been trained for. Not maintenance, but warfare. "What's the primary objective?" "Baron Financial." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at Magnolia Drive, where Carol Jensen was walking her dog, and Mr. Peterson was trimming his hedges. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that in this unremarkable yellow house, someone was planning a corporate execution. "I want a complete analysis of their holdings, their vulnerabilities, and their expansion plans. Every business decision they've made in the last 2 years, every deal in progress, every investment they're courting." You're going after Vernon Baron. It wasn't a question. "I'm going after everyone who thought they could use people as stepping stones." She watched Carol wave at Mr. Peterson, watched them exchange pleasantries about the weather. Miles wanted a wife whose family had connections that mattered. I'm going to show him exactly what that means. "Understood. I'll have the team start immediately. Should I arrange transportation back to Manhattan?" "Not yet. The divorce isn't final for 60 days. I'll stay here, finish what needs finishing as Lena Hart. Let Miles and Celeste enjoy their engagement. Let them plan their society wedding. Let them feel safe. And then? And then Saraphina Vale will remind the world she never really left." After she hung up, Saraphina, because that's who she was now, even in this small kitchen, allowed herself a moment of grief for what she'd lost. Not Miles, surprisingly. Somewhere in the reading of Raphael's report, she'd realized that the man she'd married had never really existed. She'd fallen in love with a performance, with the idea of being chosen for herself rather than her fortune, but she'd never actually been chosen at all. Miles had married Lena because Lena was easy, undemanding, useful, a comfortable placeholder until someone better came along. He'd probably never loved her, not really. He'd loved what she provided, a clean house, home-cooked meals, unwavering support, and most importantly, no expectations that would interfere with his ambitions. The moment those ambitions required a different kind of wife, he'd discarded her without hesitation. No, she didn't grieve Miles. She grieved the 7 years she'd wasted pretending ordinary could be enough. The 7 years she'd deliberately made herself small, invisible, forgettable. The 7 years she'd abandoned her true self for a fantasy that had never been real. Those years were gone, and she couldn't get them back. But she could make damn sure they counted for something. The next morning, Saraphina woke early and did something she hadn't done in 7 years. She went for a run in the expensive athletic wear she'd kept hidden in the back of her closet, then came home and made a single phone call to her personal trainer in Manhattan. "Marcus, it's Saraphina Vale. I need you to clear your schedule for the next 8 weeks. I'm coming back and I need to be ready." His shocked silence lasted 3 seconds before professional joy took over. "Ms. Vale, we all thought, I know what you thought. I'll be in Manhattan next month. I want you, my nutritionist, and my stylist on standby. We have work to do." After 7 years of deliberate mediocrity, it was time to reclaim the armor she'd abandoned. The version of herself that could walk into any room and own it. The version that made grown men nervous and corporate boards bend. She spent the rest of the week methodically erasing Lena Hart's existence, closed bank accounts, canceled subscriptions, said careful goodbyes to the few friends she'd made, citing a job opportunity in another state. Carol Jensen cried and made her promise to stay in touch, and Saraphina felt genuinely guilty for the lie, even as she knew it was necessary. "You're too good for him anyway," Carol said, hugging her tight. "I hope wherever you're going, you find someone who deserves you." "Thank you," Saraphina said softly. "You've been a wonderful friend." That at least was true. On Thursday, the full intelligence package arrived. 234 pages of detailed analysis that read like a strategic military briefing. Raphael's team had been thorough, mapping out the entire barren financial empire with the precision of cartographers charting hostile territory. What they'd found was illuminating. Vernon Barron's empire, for all its surface legitimacy, was overextended. He'd been making aggressive moves into commercial real estate, leveraging his banking assets to fund developments that wouldn't see returns for 3 to 5 years. His cash flow was solid, but not spectacular, and several of his major projects depended on continued investor confidence and favorable market conditions. In other words, he'd built something impressive but fragile. One good shake would crack the foundation. The report also detailed Celeste's role in the family business, which was essentially decorative. She sat on the board of the Barron Foundation, attended charity events, and had a meaningless vice president title at Daddy's company. But she had no real power, no actual business acumen, and from what Raphael's investigators could determine, no interest beyond maintaining her social status and acquiring things she wanted. Things like Miles Crow. Saraphina read the psychological profile Raphael had commissioned from a private investigator who specialized in corporate intelligence. Celeste Barron was described as spoiled but not stupid, ambitious but lazy, and accustomed to getting what she wants through her father's intervention rather than personal effort. She'd dated a string of men from appropriate families, but none had been suitable enough or willing enough to tolerate her expectations. Miles, with his hunger for success and lack of family connections, must have seemed perfect. Ambitious enough to be useful, grateful enough to be manageable, and just handsome enough to look good in engagement photos. Saraphina wondered if he understood yet that he'd traded one form of service for another, that Celeste would expect him to be exactly what Vernon needed him to be, to play his role in the Barron Empire as obediently as he'd expected Lena to play hers in their marriage. Probably not. Men like Miles never saw their own hypocrisy. The final section of the report covered Miles himself, and here Raphael had been particularly ruthless. Every college debt Miles had lied about paying off, but actually still carried. Every exaggerated achievement on his resume, every corner he'd cut on his way up the corporate ladder, every colleague he'd undermined, every credit he'd stolen, Every small dishonesty that added up to a pattern of someone willing to do whatever it took to succeed. Nothing illegal. Nothing even particularly unusual in the cutthroat world of corporate finance, but plenty that would make him look bad if it became public. Plenty that would embarrass the Barron family if their future son-in-law's past got the wrong kind of attention. Saraphina closed the file and smiled. She had everything she needed. Now she just needed to wait for the perfect moment to use it. The divorce papers were filed on Monday. Miles's lawyer was efficient, pushing through the proceedings with the kind of speed that suggested Vernon Barron wanted this wrapped up before the engagement party. No contested assets, no children, no complications, just 2 signatures and 60 days until it was final. Saraphina signed without hesitation. Let the clock tick down. Let Miles think this was ending cleanly, that he was escaping unscathed. She spent those 60 days transforming. The contractors packed up the house in 3 days, loading Lena Hart's modest possessions into a truck that would take them to storage or donation. She kept almost nothing, a few books, some photos, memories she wasn't quite ready to abandon completely, even though they hurt to hold. Then she drove to Manhattan in her aging sedan, parked it at a donation center, and stepped into the car Raphael had waiting, a sleek black Mercedes that felt like sliding into a second skin she'd almost forgotten how to wear. "Welcome home, Ms. Vale," the driver said, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Thank you, James. It's good to be back." The penthouse looked exactly as she'd left it 7 years ago, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Modern furniture in shades of cream and gray, art on the walls worth more than most people's houses. The staff had maintained it perfectly, fresh flowers in every room and her favorite coffee already brewing in the kitchen. She stood at the windows and looked out at the city she'd abandoned, watching the sun set over buildings where empires rose and fell with every trading bell. This was her world, not the small yellow house on Magnolia Drive, not the life of coupons and book clubs and making herself invisible. This. Marcus arrived the next morning at 6 a.m., took one look at her, and whistled. 7 years is a long time, Ms. Vale. We've got work to do. Then let's get started. She trained like she was preparing for war because, in a way, she was. 2 hours every morning with Marcus, rebuilding muscle and stamina she'd let deteriorate. Afternoons with her nutritionist, relearning how to fuel a body that needed to be sharp and strong. Evenings with her stylist, assembling a wardrobe that would announce her return without saying a word. The woman in the mirror changed day by day. Softer edges hardened, apologetic posture straightened into confidence. Lena Hart's careful invisibility burned away, revealing the steel underneath. 3 weeks into her transformation, Raphael requested a meeting at her penthouse. He arrived with 2 associates carrying briefcases full of documents and wore the expression of someone who'd found something interesting. "Vernon Barron is making a move," he said without preamble, spreading documents across her dining table. "He's trying to acquire Stellar Industries, the tech manufacturer. It's a hostile takeover, very aggressive. If he succeeds, it'll be the crown jewel of his empire. The deal's not public yet, but it will be within the month." Saraphina studied the documents, her mind already racing through implications and opportunities. Stellar Industries was worth billions. A clean, profitable company with patents that would be valuable to anyone with vision. Vernon wanted it to diversify his holdings, to prove he could play with the big boys in the tech sector. "What's his weak point?" she asked. "Financing. He's leveraging everything for this acquisition, using his banking assets as collateral, courting outside investors, basically betting the farm. If the deal falls through, or if his credibility takes a hit during negotiations, the whole thing collapses." "And if the deal collapses?" Raphael smiled. "His overextension becomes very public. Investor confidence drops. His other projects suffer. The empire doesn't fall, but it definitely stumbles. Hard." Saraphina looked at the papers and saw the pattern clearly. Vernon had been so successful for so long that he'd grown arrogant, convinced his golden touch was permanent. He was making moves that would be brilliant if they worked, but catastrophic if they didn't. And he had no idea that Saraphina Vale, who'd built her fortune on knowing exactly when to strike and when to wait, was watching every move he made. "I want daily updates on the Stellar acquisition," she said. "Every meeting, every negotiation, every investor pitch. And Raphael, start making calls very quietly, I want to know who else might be interested in acquiring Stellar if Vernon's deal suddenly became uncertain. You're going to outbid him. I'm going to destroy his credibility so thoroughly that Stellar's board wouldn't accept his offer if he doubled it. She gathered the documents and handed them back to Raphael. But not yet. First, I need to make an appearance. Remind people that Saraphina Vale exists and is very much active. The opportunity came 2 weeks later, at a charity gala benefiting pediatric cancer research. It was the kind of event Saraphina used to attend regularly. Manhattan's elite gathering to write checks and network under the guise of philanthropy. She'd skipped it for 7 years, and her absence had been noted and speculated about extensively. Her return would be noticed even more. She dressed with military precision, a midnight blue gown that cost more than a year of Lena Hart's grocery budgets, jewelry that was understated but unmistakably real, hair and makeup that struck the perfect balance between elegant and intimidating. When she looked in the mirror, she saw no trace of the woman who'd cried over cold steak and burned down candles. That woman was gone. This woman didn't cry. She conquered. Raphael accompanied her, serving as both attorney and shield. Half the room will be shocked you're back. The other half will pretend they knew all along. How do you want to play it? Honestly, she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and surveyed the ballroom full of New York's most powerful people. I'm not hiding anymore. Let them see exactly who I am. They saw. Heads turned as she moved through the room, conversation stuttering and restarting. Saraphina Vale, the reclusive billionaire who'd vanished 7 years ago, had returned. Within minutes, she was surrounded by people wanting to welcome her back, ask where she'd been, position themselves in her orbit. She was gracious but distant, revealing nothing while extracting everything. By the time dinner was served, she'd gathered intelligence on a dozen business deals, 3 corporate scandals, and 5 people who thought her absence meant her empire was vulnerable. They'd thought wrong. She was making small talk with a hedge fund manager when she saw them across the room. Miles and Celeste, making their entrance like visiting royalty. Miles wore a tuxedo that probably cost 3 months of his old salary, and Celeste glittered beside him in diamonds that caught every light. They looked perfect together, like they'd been designed as a matched set. Vernon Barron trailed behind them, accepting congratulations on his daughter's engagement with the satisfied air of a man who'd successfully traded assets. Saraphina watched them work the room, watched Miles shake hands and laugh, with men who would have intimidated him a year ago. He looked comfortable now, confident in his new world, like he belonged. She wondered how long that confidence would last. Ms. Vale? Raphael's voice was quiet beside her. They don't know you're here yet. We can avoid them if you'd prefer. No. She set down her champagne and straightened her shoulders. I think it's time for a reunion. She crossed the ballroom with deliberate steps, watching the moment Miles saw her. His eyes went wide, confusion flickering across his face because something was familiar, but he couldn't quite place what. Then recognition hit, and he went pale. Celeste noticed his reaction and followed his gaze, her perfect smile freezing in place. Saraphina stopped directly in front of them, close enough that they had no choice but to acknowledge her. Hello, Miles, she said pleasantly. It's been a while. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Lena, what are you Oh, I'm sorry. I should clarify. She extended her hand to Celeste with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Saraphina Vale. I don't believe we've been properly introduced, though I've heard so much about you. Celeste's handshake was automatic, her expression caught between confusion and growing horror as she processed the name. Saraphina Vale. The Saraphina Vale. Is there another? Saraphina turned back to Miles, who looked like he might be sick. You seem surprised to see me, Miles. I thought you'd be happy. After all, you said you needed a wife whose family had connections that mattered, whose last name opened doors. She paused, letting him see the full weight of what he'd thrown away. You were absolutely right. It makes all the difference. You're... Miles couldn't seem to form complete sentences. How is this possible? Well, when a woman with significant resources decides she wants to experience normal life, she can create a very convincing illusion. I was Lena Hart for 7 years. It was educational. I learned a lot about who people really are when they think you have nothing to offer them. But Vernon Barron had joined them now, his political instincts sensing something dangerous happening. Ms. Vale, what a pleasure to see you back in circulation. My daughter, Celeste, and her fiancé, Miles Crow. Oh, Miles and I know each other quite well. Seraphina's smile was razor sharp. We were married, actually. Well, still are for another 3 weeks, technically. Until the divorce is final. The color drained from Vernon's face as he understood the implications. His daughter's fiancé was still married to one of the wealthiest, most powerful women in the country. The optics alone were a disaster. There must be some mistake, Vernon said carefully. Miles, you said your ex-wife was nobody, Seraphina finished for him. Yes, that's what I wanted him to think. It made the whole experience more authentic. She turned to Celeste. I hope you'll be very happy together. Though I should warn you, Miles has very specific ideas about what a wife should be. Make sure you're prepared to spend your life making him comfortable while he climbs whatever ladder he's fixated on. It's exhausting work, but I'm sure you're up to it. This is insane, Miles finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. You lied to me. For 7 years, you lied about who you were. I did, Seraphina agreed. I wanted to know if someone could love me for myself without the complications of my fortune. Turns out the answer was no. You loved me for my service, my convenience, my willingness to be small enough to make you feel big. The moment I stopped being useful, you left. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. But at least I know the truth now. You never wanted a partner, Miles. You wanted an employee you didn't have to pay. Congratulations on finding another one. She stepped back, her public smile returning. Enjoy your evening. I have some old friends to catch up with. She walked away before any of them could respond, feeling their shocked stares burning into her back. Let them process. Let them panic. Let them wonder what she planned to do with the power they'd just realized she'd always had. Behind her, she heard Vernon's urgent whisper to Miles. We need to talk. Now. Perfect. Raphael caught up with her near the bar, fighting to hide his grin. That was beautifully done. That was just the opening move. She accepted a fresh glass of champagne and raised it in a silent toast to her former husband. Now let's see how well they play defense. The news cycle exploded within 12 hours. Seraphina woke to her phone buzzing with notifications. Texts from business contacts she hadn't spoken to in years. Emails from reporters requesting interviews, and a particularly frantic voicemail from Miles that she deleted without listening to. The society columns were having a field day with the revelation that the mysterious Saraphina Vale had not only returned from her 7-year absence, but had been living as an ordinary housewife the entire time. The headlines ranged from breathless to savage. Billionaire heiress played house while empire grew. The 7-year disguise, inside Saraphina Vale's secret life. And her personal favorite, from coupons to corporate power, the most expensive divorce in New York history. That last one made her laugh because the divorce itself was worth nothing. They'd had no shared assets, no community property to split. But the optics were devastating for Miles and the Barron family. The man Celeste was supposed to marry had been married to one of the wealthiest women in the world and thrown her away because she wasn't rich enough. The irony was too perfect for the press to resist. Raphael arrived at her penthouse at 7 a.m. with coffee and a stack of newspapers, his expression caught between professional concern and barely suppressed satisfaction. Vernon Barron's PR team has been working overtime, he said, spreading the papers across her breakfast table. They're trying to spin this as a romantic narrative. Young love overcoming obstacles, Miles and Celeste's connection transcending his past. But the society pages aren't buying it. Too many people remember you from before. Too many people are shocked you'd hide yourself like that. Seraphina skimmed the articles, noting which outlets were friendly to the Barons and which were sharpening their knives. What's Vernon doing about the Stellar acquisition? Doubling down. He's accelerating the timeline, trying to close the deal before this scandal affects his credibility. He's scheduled a major investor presentation for next week. Then we need to move faster. She set down the papers and looked at Raphael with the focused intensity that had built her empire. I want you to reach out to Thomas Chen at Meridian Capital, very quietly. Tell him I'm interested in discussing a partnership on a major tech acquisition. Don't mention Stellar specifically, but make sure he knows I'm looking at that sector. Thomas Chen was a legendary investor known for two things: his uncanny ability to spot winning opportunities and his pathological need to be on the winning side of every deal. If he thought Saraphina Vale was interested in tech acquisitions, he'd start asking questions. And when he started asking questions about Vernon Barron's bid for Stellar Industries, he'd find all the vulnerabilities Raphael's team had already mapped. "You're going to use Chen to tank Vernon's credibility," Raphael said. "I'm going to let Vernon tank his own credibility. Chen will just help speed up the inevitable." She stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city that was once again her playing field. "Vernon's overextended himself. All I have to do is make the right people nervous enough to look closely at what he's really offering." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize, but the voicemail that followed was Miles's voice, tight with panic. "Lena, Saraphina, whoever you are, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. The press is everywhere. Celeste's family is furious. Please, just call me back so we can figure this out like adults." She played the message on speaker so Raphael could hear, watching his eyebrows rise. "Like adults," Raphael repeated. "That's rich, coming from a man who served divorce papers at the cafe where you had your first date." "He's scared." Saraphina deleted the message. "Vernon probably tore into him last night, explained exactly how badly he'd miscalculated, how marrying the ex-wife of Saraphina Vale makes him look either like a fool or a gold digger, depending on which narrative people prefer. Are you going to call him back?" "No, let him panic. Panic makes people sloppy." She spent the rest of the day in meetings, reestablishing her presence in the business world with surgical precision. Lunch with the CEO of a pharmaceutical company she'd invested in years ago. Coffee with a tech entrepreneur who'd been trying to reach her for 3 years. Dinner with a group of investors who controlled enough capital to make Vernon Barron's empire look modest. Every conversation was carefully orchestrated. She didn't mention Vernon or Miles directly, but she made sure people understood she was back, active, and looking at opportunities in sectors that happened to overlap with Barron Financial's current expansion plans. By the time she returned to her penthouse that evening, the groundwork was laid. Now she just had to wait for the pieces to fall. They fell faster than she expected. 3 days after the gala, Vernon Barron requested a meeting. His assistant called Raphael's office with a tone that suggested the request was really a demand wrapped in politeness, asking if Ms. Vale might have time to discuss a matter of mutual interest. "He wants to negotiate," Raphael said when he relayed the message. "Probably offer you something if you'll back off and let the scandal die down." "Tell him I'm available tomorrow, 2 p.m. My office." She paused, considering. "And Raphael? Make sure security knows he's coming. I don't trust desperate men with everything to lose." Vernon arrived exactly on time, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most cars, and wearing the expression of a man who'd spent his entire life getting what he wanted through force of will and strategic intimidation. He was accompanied by 2 lawyers and his chief financial officer, a clear signal that this was business, not a social call. Saraphina met them in her office, a corner suite with views that made even jaded billionaires pause to appreciate the cityscape spread below like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. She dressed for war in a cream suit that cost a fortune and conveyed exactly the right message: untouchable, unimpressed, and completely in control. "Mr. Barron," she said, not rising from behind her desk. "Thank you for coming. Miss Vale." Vernon took the seat across from her without waiting to be invited, a power play that might have worked if she hadn't owned the building they were sitting in. "I think we can both agree this situation has gotten out of hand. Can we?" She folded her hands on the desk, her expression neutral. "I'm not sure we're talking about the same situation. The media circus surrounding your relationship with Miles Crow. It's damaging to everyone involved. My daughter is being harassed by reporters. Miles can't leave his apartment without cameras in his face, and your privacy is being invaded just as badly." "My privacy was invaded the moment your future son-in-law decided to announce our divorce to the society pages while bragging about his new connection to your family." She let that land, watched Vernon's jaw tighten. "But please, continue. I'm prepared to make this worth your while." Vernon gestured to his CFO, who slid a folder across the desk. "A settlement agreement. Generous terms. In exchange for a public statement supporting the relationship and declining to comment further on your marriage to Miles." Saraphina didn't touch the folder. "You want to buy my silence. I want to resolve this situation in a way that benefits everyone. You get substantial compensation for your trouble. My family moves forward without constant media scrutiny. Miles and Celeste can start their marriage without this shadow hanging over them. How much? She asked it flatly, like she was asking about the weather. Vernon's CFO named a figure that would have changed most people's lives. It wouldn't even register as a rounding error in Saraphina's quarterly earnings report. That's insulting, she said calmly. Not because the number's too small, though it is, but because you think I need your money badly enough to let Miles Crow walk away from 7 years of marriage without consequences. What consequences? Vernon leaned forward, his patience fraying. You hid who you were. You lied to him about everything. If anyone has grounds for grievance here, it's Miles. Really? Saraphina's voice could have frozen fire. Let me tell you what actually happened, Mr. Barron. I married a man who claimed to love me. I built a life around supporting his ambitions. And the moment he thought he'd found someone more useful to his career, he threw me away like garbage. The fact that I'm wealthy doesn't change the fact that he's a user who treated our marriage like a job he could quit when a better offer came along. He made a choice about his future. He made a choice to treat people as disposable. And now he's discovering that some people don't stay disposed of. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. Here's my counteroffer, Mr. Barron. I'll decline to comment publicly on Miles and your daughter's relationship. I won't interfere with their engagement or wedding, and in exchange, you'll withdraw your bid for Stellar Industries. The room went silent. Vernon's lawyers exchanged glances. His CFO looked confused. That's absurd, Vernon finally said. The Stellar acquisition has nothing to do with your divorce. No, but it has everything to do with your overextension. You've leveraged your entire empire to make that bid, and if it falls through, you'll spend the next 5 years digging yourself out. I'm offering you a graceful exit before that becomes public knowledge. Vernon stood slowly, his face darkening. You're bluffing. You have no interest in Stellar Industries. Don't I? Saraphina smiled. Ask Thomas Chen. We had a very interesting conversation yesterday about tech sector opportunities. He seemed quite excited about the possibilities. She watched the color drain from Vernon's face as he understood. Thomas Chen was one of his key investors in the Stellar deal. If Chen pulled out because he thought Saraphina Vale was entering the bidding war, the whole acquisition would collapse. You're threatening to destroy a multi-billion-dollar deal because my daughter's fiancé divorced you? Vernon's voice was tight with rage. No, Mr. Barron, I'm threatening to let you destroy yourself by continuing to make aggressive moves you can't afford while your credibility is compromised by family scandal. I'm just offering you the chance to step back before you fall off the cliff you're currently running toward. She walked to the door and opened it. Think about it. You have until Friday to decide. Vernon looked like he wanted to say something scathing, but his lawyers were already pulling him toward the exit, recognizing a losing battle when they saw one. As they filed out, his CFO paused. For what it's worth, Ms. Vale, the man said quietly, I told him the Stellar timeline was too aggressive. He wouldn't listen. They rarely do, Saraphina said. Overconfidence is an expensive blind spot. After they left, Raphael emerged from the conference room where he'd been monitoring the meeting via video feed. That was a calculated risk, he said. If Vernon calls your bluff and you're not actually prepared to bid on Stellar, I'm prepared. She returned to her desk and pulled up a file on her computer. I had my team run the numbers. Stellar Industries would be a solid addition to my portfolio. If Vernon forces me to actually acquire it, I will, but I'd rather not spend $15 billion just to prove a point. You think he'll back down? I think he'll try to find another way first. He's not used to losing, and he's definitely not used to anyone having more power than he does in a negotiation. But his CFO knows the truth. They're overextended, and I just made their situation exponentially worse. She was right. Over the next 3 days, Vernon tried everything. His lawyers called with modified settlement offers. His PR team planted stories suggesting Saraphina was unstable, vengeful, unable to accept that her marriage had ended. One particularly bold gossip columnist even suggested she'd deliberately trapped Miles by hiding her wealth. Each attack was calculated to damage her credibility and make her back down. Each one failed because Saraphina had spent 7 years learning to be underestimated, and she knew exactly how to turn that perception into a weapon. Then Miles called. Not a voicemail this time, but a direct call at 11 p.m. on Thursday night, his voice raw with desperation. "Please stop this," he said when she answered. "Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Everyone knows I screwed up. Everyone knows I didn't appreciate what I had. But Celeste had nothing to do with any of this. She doesn't deserve to have her life destroyed because I made bad choices." "Interesting." Seraphina's voice was ice. "You care about protecting Celeste from consequences. Did you ever consider protecting me? When you were planning to divorce me, did you think about how it would feel to have 7 years of my life dismissed as service? Did you consider that maybe I'd invested just as much in our marriage as you had, maybe more, and deserved better than divorce papers served at our anniversary dinner location? I know I handled it badly. I was selfish and cruel, and I took you for granted." His voice cracked. "But I'm begging you, Saraphina, not for me, for Celeste, for Vernon, who's a good man who doesn't deserve to lose everything because his daughter fell in love with someone damaged." "A good man!" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Vernon Barron is a ruthless corporate shark who spent 30 years crushing smaller companies and buying politicians. The only reason you think he's good is because he's currently useful to your ambitions, just like you thought I was good when I was useful, and disposable when I wasn't. What do you want from me?" Miles sounded broken now, all his polish stripped away. "What will it take for you to let this go?" Seraphina thought about that question. What did she want? Revenge was too simple. Watching Miles suffer was satisfying in a shallow way, but it didn't actually heal anything. Destroying Vernon's empire would prove her power, but wouldn't give her back the 7 years she'd lost. What she wanted was something she couldn't take from Miles Crow or Vernon Barron or anyone else. She wanted those 7 years to have mattered, wanted them to count for something other than an expensive lesson in human nature. "I want you to understand," she said finally, "that people aren't tools, that you can't just use them up and throw them away when they stop serving your purposes. I want you to feel what it's like to be powerless while someone else decides your future. And I want you to remember this feeling every time you're tempted to treat another person like they're disposable." "I understand. I swear I understand now." "No, you don't, but you will." She hung up without saying goodbye, the same way he'd hung up that terrible Tuesday afternoon when she'd tried to save their marriage. Friday morning, Vernon's lawyer called Raphael with a counteroffer. Vernon would withdraw from the Stellar acquisition if Seraphina agreed to release a joint statement with Miles acknowledging their mutual decision to end the marriage and wishing each other well. "He's trying to save face," Raphael said. "Make it look like a friendly divorce instead of him abandoning you." "Tell him yes," Seraphina said, "on one condition. The statement includes a clause that Miles and Celeste will wait 1 full year before marrying. Let them prove their relationship can survive without the rush of scandal and defiance." Vernon agreed within an hour. The statement was carefully crafted by lawyers on both sides, bloodless and professional, acknowledging the end of the marriage without assigning blame and expressing hope that both parties would find happiness in the future. Miles and Celeste announced they were postponing their wedding to allow time for healing and reflection, which everyone understood meant Vernon had ordered them to wait until the scandal died down. The Stellar acquisition was quietly withdrawn, Vernon citing strategic realignment of business priorities. His stock took a minor hit, but nothing catastrophic. The empire was wounded but would survive. Miles and Celeste disappeared from public view, likely exiled to one of Vernon's properties until the media lost interest in their story. Seraphina watched it all unfold with the satisfaction of a chess player who just executed a complex strategy perfectly. She hadn't destroyed them. That would have been too easy, too crude. Instead, she'd backed them into corners, forced them to make choices that revealed their true characters, and let them live with the consequences. Vernon learned that power had limits when someone with more power decided to push back. Miles learned that using people had costs that eventually came due. And Celeste learned that Daddy's money couldn't fix everything, especially when someone with more money decided otherwise. But the victory felt hollow. Seraphina stood in her penthouse overlooking the city she'd reclaimed, surrounded by luxury and power, and felt the same loneliness that had driven her to become Lena Hart in the first place. She'd proved her point, had shown Miles and Vernon and everyone else that Saraphina Vale couldn't be discarded without consequences, had reclaimed her place in the world she'd abandoned. Now what? The question haunted her through the following weeks as the scandal slowly faded from the headlines. The divorce was finalized on schedule, reducing 7 years of marriage to a stack of legal documents and a signature. Miles was gone from her life completely, just another expensive mistake cataloged and filed away. But the emptiness remained. The penthouse was beautiful and cold. The business world welcomed her back with respect and fear, treating her like the power she was, but never the person underneath. She'd spent 7 years pretending to be someone else, trying to find authentic connection. She'd failed, but at least she'd tried. Now she was back to being herself, powerful and protected and alone. Raphael found her one evening standing at the windows, watching the sun set over Central Park. "You did it," he said quietly. "You came back, reclaimed everything. Won." "Did I?" She didn't turn around. "I'm exactly where I was 8 years ago, Raphael, alone in a beautiful cage, surrounded by people who want something from me. The only difference is, now I know for certain that the alternative doesn't work either." Maybe you were looking in the wrong places. Maybe there are no right places. Maybe this is just what life is when you're born into money and power. Maybe authentic connection isn't possible when every relationship has an inherent imbalance. Or maybe, Raphael said carefully, you were trying too hard to be someone you weren't. Lena Hart was a lie, yes, but she was also you trying to erase everything that makes you who you are. Maybe the answer isn't to hide your power or to wield it like a weapon. Maybe it's to find people who can see both and value both. Saraphina considered that. She'd gone from one extreme to another, from Saraphina Vale, who trusted no one, to Lena Hart, who trusted too easily. Neither version had found what she was looking for because both versions were incomplete. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted. "Then maybe it's time to learn." Raphael set a folder on her desk. "I took the liberty of compiling some opportunities. Philanthropic initiatives that need leadership, boards that would benefit from your expertise, ways to use your power that might feel more meaningful than corporate warfare." She opened the folder and found proposals for foundations focused on helping women escape abusive relationships, programs to provide business training to people from disadvantaged backgrounds, initiatives to combat financial manipulation and predatory lending, ways to turn her painful education into something that might help others avoid the same lessons. "You think I should become a philanthropist," she said. "I think you should become whatever version of yourself lets you sleep at night. The corporate Saraphina Vale is brilliant and powerful and lonely. Lena Hart was a fantasy that couldn't survive reality. Maybe there's a third option, someone who's honest about her power but uses it for more than just proving points." Saraphina looked at the proposals and felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The idea that maybe the last 7 years didn't have to be wasted, that maybe the pain she'd experienced could be transformed into purpose. "I'll think about it," she said. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the women like Lena Hart, women who made themselves small for men who didn't deserve them, who stayed in relationships that slowly eroded their sense of self, who believed that love required self-erasure. She thought about Carol Jensen, who'd brought banana bread and kindness to a neighbor she barely knew, about the library volunteers who'd welcomed her to book club without caring about her pedigree, about all the ordinary people who'd treated Lena Hart with more genuine warmth than most of high society had ever shown Saraphina Vale. Maybe Raphael was right. Maybe there was a way to bridge those two worlds, to be powerful without being isolated, to be authentic without being vulnerable to users like Miles. Maybe she could build something that mattered more than winning corporate battles. The idea took root and grew, keeping her awake until dawn. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, she'd made a decision. She would establish a foundation, properly funded, professionally managed, genuinely committed to helping people who found themselves trapped in the same patterns she'd experienced. Not revenge, not warfare, just the simple act of turning pain into purpose, of making sure her expensive mistakes might save someone else the same costs. It wouldn't erase the 7 years with Miles, wouldn't make the loneliness disappear overnight, but it was a start. A way forward that didn't require her to be either the ice queen or the invisible housewife. Maybe she could just be Saraphina, complicated, damaged, powerful, and finally ready to figure out what to do with all of it. She called Raphael at 6 a.m. "Set up meetings with foundation lawyers. I want this operational within 6 months. Full funding, real infrastructure, actual impact." And Raphael? I want to run it myself. Not delegate it to some board while I sit in my penthouse counting money. His voice carried surprise and approval. Understood. I'll start making calls. After she hung up, Saraphina stood at her windows and watched the city wake up. Somewhere out there, Miles was probably still asleep in his Meridian penthouse, Celeste beside him, both of them trapped in their year of waiting while Vernon rebuilt his damaged reputation. She didn't hate them anymore. Didn't even think about them much. They'd been necessary antagonists in her transformation, catalysts that forced her to stop hiding and start becoming whoever she was supposed to be next. But they weren't important. Not really. They were just people who'd revealed truths she'd needed to learn, painful as the education had been. What mattered now was what she did with those truths. How she rebuilt herself from the ashes of both her identities into something whole and real and purposeful. The corporate battles would continue. She was still Saraphina Vale, after all, and power was both her inheritance and her nature. But now she'd have something else too. Something that might, eventually, fill the emptiness that had driven her to hide in the first place. It was a beginning, not perfect, not healed, not anywhere close to happily ever after. But it was hers, honest and complicated and finally moving forward instead of running away. That was enough. For now, it was enough. The foundation took shape with the same precision Saraphina had once applied to building her business empire. But this time, the metrics that mattered weren't profit margins and stock prices. She measured success in lives changed, patterns broken, and futures reclaimed from the grip of manipulation. She named it the Meridian Foundation, a deliberate choice that made her smile every time she signed documents. The building Miles had been so proud to live in would now be immortalized as the name of an organization helping people escape exactly the kind of users he'd become. The irony was delicious. Within 4 months, the foundation had offices in 3 cities, a staff of 42, and partnerships with legal clinics, counseling centers, and financial literacy programs. Saraphina threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even Raphael, who'd known her at her most driven. "You're working 16-hour days," he observed one evening, finding her still at her desk at 9 p.m. reviewing grant applications. "That's more than you ever did running your actual empire." "This matters more." She didn't look up from the file she was reading. A woman named Diana, whose husband had isolated her from her family, controlled every penny she spent and convinced her she was worthless. The story was brutally familiar. "These are real people, Raphael, not just numbers on a balance sheet." "I know. I'm just worried you're using this to avoid dealing with everything that happened." "Maybe I am." She finally met his eyes. "But if my avoidance helps people like Diana escape before they waste 7 years on someone who doesn't deserve them, then it's productive avoidance." Raphael didn't argue, but his concern lingered in the air between them like smoke. The foundation's official launch was scheduled for a major gala in October, 6 months after Saraphina's dramatic reappearance in New York society. The event would introduce the Meridian Foundation to the philanthropic world, court major donors, and establish Saraphina Vale as more than just a reclusive billionaire with a scandalous divorce. Planning the gala meant working with Elena Vance, one of Manhattan's premier event coordinators. Elena arrived for their first meeting with a portfolio of previous events and the kind of confident efficiency that Saraphina appreciated. "I understand you want this to be different from typical charity galas," Elena said, spreading mood boards across the conference table. "Less about wealthy people congratulating themselves, more about actually highlighting the work." "Exactly." Saraphina studied the concepts Elena had prepared. "I want the survivors we've helped to be present, if they're comfortable. I want people to hear real stories, not just write checks to feel good about themselves." "That's brave. It'll make some donors uncomfortable." "Good. Comfortable people don't change anything." They worked together for 3 hours, Elena proving to be not just competent, but genuinely passionate about the foundation's mission. As she was packing up to leave, she paused. "Can I ask you something personal, Ms. Vale?" Saraphina tensed automatically, but something about Elena's directness made her nod. "The stories about your divorce, about you hiding who you were to test whether someone could love you for yourself. Was that really why you did it? Does it matter?" "It matters to people like me." Elena's voice was quiet but firm. "I spent 5 years with someone who made me feel like I had to be smaller, quieter, less ambitious to keep him happy. Reading about what you went through, how you got out and rebuilt yourself, It helped me leave. So yes, it matters. Seraphina felt something crack in her chest. The carefully maintained distance she kept from her own pain suddenly breached by Elena's honesty. It was real, she said. All of it. I wanted to know if I could be loved for who I was without the complications of money. Turns out the answer was no, but not because of the money. Because I chose someone who was only capable of loving what people could do for him. She paused, then added, I'm glad you got out. Me too. Elena smiled, gathering her things. I'll have the venue proposals ready by Friday. And Ms. Vale, thank you for being honest about it, for not pretending it didn't hurt. After Elena left, Seraphina sat in her office and let herself feel the weight of what she'd built. The foundation wasn't just about helping others. It was about transforming her own pain into something that mattered, about making sure the 7 years with Miles counted for something beyond expensive lessons in human nature. But Elena's words lingered. People were watching her story, finding courage in her survival. That was a responsibility she hadn't anticipated, and it felt both terrifying and strangely empowering. The next morning, Raphael arrived with news that disrupted her careful equilibrium. Vernon Barron's empire is collapsing, he said without preamble, setting a stack of financial reports on her desk. The stellar withdrawal damaged his credibility worse than we thought. 3 major investors have pulled out of his projects. His stock is down 40%. The board is calling for his resignation. Seraphina felt no triumph, just a hollow acknowledgement of inevitable consequences. And Miles? Still employed, but barely. Vernon's keeping him on to save face, but word is he's essentially been demoted to glorified assistant. Celeste is apparently furious. Their engagement is still on, but the society pages are reporting tension. They deserve each other, Seraphina said quietly. Then, surprising herself, she added, Make sure Vernon knows I'm not pursuing further action. Whatever happens to him now is his own doing, not mine. Raphael raised an eyebrow. That's generous, considering what he tried to do. It's not generosity, it's closure. I don't need to destroy him to prove anything. He's destroying himself just fine. What she didn't say was that watching Vernon Barron's empire crumble felt empty. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, just a vague sadness that so much power had been wielded so carelessly, that so many people treated other people like game pieces to be moved and sacrificed. She'd wanted Vernon and Miles to understand what they'd done, to feel consequences. They were feeling them now. That was enough. The weeks leading up to the gala were consumed with work, reviewing applications, approving programs, meeting with the women the foundation had helped. Each story was different, but fundamentally the same. Someone had made themselves small for someone else, had believed that love required self-erasure, had finally found the courage to leave. One afternoon, Seraphina met with a woman named Patricia, who'd been married for 12 years to a man who'd systematically isolated her from everyone who cared about her. The foundation had helped her secure legal representation, safe housing, and job training. Now Patricia sat across from Seraphina in a conference room, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was crazy, Patricia said. He told me I was oversensitive, that I imagined problems that didn't exist, that no one else would ever put up with me. I believed him. For 12 years, I believed him. You're not crazy, Seraphina said firmly. You were manipulated by someone who benefited from your doubt. How did you know to leave? Patricia asked. How did you know it wasn't you? Seraphina thought about that Tuesday night, the cold steak and burned candles. The moment she'd realized Miles didn't just not love her anymore, he'd probably never loved her at all. I didn't know, she admitted. Not at first. I thought I could fix it, that if I just tried harder or was better somehow, he'd remember why he married me. But then he made it clear that I was never the problem. His inability to value people was the problem. And that wasn't something I could fix, no matter how small I made myself. Patricia nodded slowly. The counselor you connected me with said something similar, that I kept trying to solve a problem that wasn't mine to solve. Exactly. Your husband's cruelty isn't your responsibility to fix. Your only responsibility is to yourself. After Patricia left, Seraphina sat in the conference room and cried for the first time since signing the divorce papers. Not for Miles, not for the marriage, but for all the Patricias and Dianas and countless other women who'd been taught that love meant self-destruction, that being chosen meant being diminished. She cried for Lena Hart, who'd tried so hard to be enough. And for Saraphina Vale, who'd run from her own power because it made people treat her like a thing instead of a person. Then she dried her tears, fixed her makeup, and went back to work. Because crying was necessary, but action was what changed things. The gala arrived on a crisp October evening, the kind of night when Manhattan felt like the center of the universe. Saraphina had chosen a converted warehouse in Brooklyn rather than a traditional ballroom, wanting the event to feel different from the usual society circuit. Elena had transformed the space into something that managed to be both elegant and genuine, with displays showing the foundation's work and quiet corners where survivors could tell their stories to anyone willing to listen. Saraphina dressed carefully, a deep emerald gown that was beautiful without being ostentatious, jewelry that was real but understated. She wanted to look powerful but approachable, successful but not untouchable. When she arrived, the space was already filling with guests, politicians and business leaders mixed with counselors and legal advocates. Society matrons who'd come to see Saraphina Vale in person found themselves in conversation with women who'd been homeless 3 months ago and were now rebuilding their lives with the foundation's help. It was exactly what she'd hoped for, uncomfortable in the best way, forcing people to confront realities they usually ignored. Elena found her near the entrance, looking simultaneously stressed and triumphant. "There's a problem," she said quietly. "What kind of problem?" Miles Crow and Celeste Barron just arrived. With Vernon. Security stopped them at the door, but they're insisting they were invited. Seraphina's first instinct was to have them removed immediately. Her second was to wonder what game Vernon was playing. Her third was to recognize an opportunity. "Let them in," she said. Elena looked shocked. "Are you sure?" "Completely. But make sure security knows to watch them. And Elena, thank you for the warning." She found them in the main gallery 10 minutes later, looking profoundly uncomfortable as a survivor named Rachel described how her ex-husband had controlled every aspect of her life for 9 years. Miles had gone pale, while Celeste looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Vernon maintained his political smile, but his eyes were calculating. Seraphina approached them directly, cutting through the crowd with the kind of presence that made people step aside automatically. "Vernon," she said pleasantly, "this is unexpected. I don't recall sending you an invitation." "We came to show support," Vernon said smoothly. "The Meridian Foundation is doing important work. We wanted to contribute." "How thoughtful." Her voice was ice wrapped in silk. "Though I have to wonder what specifically inspired this sudden interest in helping people escape manipulative relationships." Vernon's smile tightened. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Ms. Vale. Even those of us who've made mistakes." "I agree. Second chances are valuable. Earned, not given, but valuable." She turned to Miles, who was staring at the floor like he wished it would open up and swallow him. "What about you, Miles? What brings you here?" He finally looked up, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been genuine shame. "I wanted to apologize, publicly, for how I treated you, for not seeing what I had until it was gone." "That's very brave," Seraphina said, and meant it. "But this isn't the place for your redemption arc. These women are here to celebrate their survival, not to make men feel better about their failures." "I know. I just thought you could show up, say sorry, and somehow balance the scales." She kept her voice quiet, aware of the people starting to notice their conversation. "That's not how this works, Miles. You don't get to feel better about what you did just because you acknowledge it was wrong." Celeste finally spoke, her voice sharp with defended pride. "You're being unnecessarily cruel. Miles has been through hell because of you. His career is ruined. His reputation is destroyed. Haven't you punished him enough?" Seraphina looked at Celeste, really looked at her, and saw a woman who'd been raised to believe that having power meant wielding it without consequence, who'd pointed at Miles like he was a handbag and expected Daddy to acquire him, who had no concept that people might have value beyond their usefulness. "I haven't punished anyone," Seraphina said calmly. "I've simply stopped protecting people from the consequences of their own choices." Miles destroyed his own career when he decided to divorce his wife and immediately get engaged to his boss's daughter. Vernon damaged his own reputation by overextending his empire and then trying to buy my silence when the scandal became inconvenient. I didn't do any of that. I just refused to make it easier for them to pretend it didn't matter. "You manipulated everything. Celeste started, but Vernon cut her off. Celeste, enough. He turned to Seraphina with something that might have been respect in his eyes. You're right. We made our choices and we're living with them. I came here tonight because I wanted you to know that, despite everything, I recognize what you're building here is important, and I'd like to contribute. A substantial donation, no strings attached. Why? Seraphina asked bluntly. Because my daughter needs to understand that actions have consequences. And because maybe if I support the kind of work that helps people recognize manipulation, she'll learn something before she becomes the kind of person who treats people the way we treated you. It was the closest thing to an apology Vernon Barron was probably capable of, admitting fault through action rather than words. Seraphina studied him, trying to decide if this was another manipulation or genuine contrition. $10 million, Vernon said, to the foundation. Anonymous donation, if you prefer. But I want it to fund programs that teach people to recognize when they're being used. To see the patterns before they waste years on people who don't deserve them. That's very specific, Seraphina said. It should be. I spent 30 years using people, and I taught my daughter to do the same. Maybe it's time that stopped. He looked at Miles, then back to Seraphina. You were right about him, you know. I recognized it the moment I met him. He was hungry and ambitious and willing to do whatever it took to succeed. I thought that made him perfect for Celeste. I didn't think about what it said about his character. Dad, Celeste's voice carried warning. No, Vernon's voice was firm. You need to hear this. Ms. Vale didn't ruin anything. She just made us see what we'd become. And maybe that's worth $10 million in penance. Seraphina considered the offer. $10 million would fund programs for hundreds of people, would create resources that could genuinely change lives. And if Vernon was serious about learning from his mistakes, about teaching his daughter to value people differently, then maybe something good could come from all this pain. 20 million, she said. 10 for the foundation, and 10 for a new program specifically focused on teaching young people to recognize manipulative relationship patterns. Your name doesn't go on anything, but you personally attend the first year of workshops. You sit in rooms with people whose lives were damaged by the same kind of behavior you've built your empire on, and you listen. Vernon looked shocked, then thoughtful. That's a hell of a penance. That's the point. Money is easy. Time and discomfort are what actually create change. He was silent for a long moment, and Seraphina could see him calculating the cost. Not financial, but personal. The cost of admitting he'd been wrong, of sitting with the consequences of his choices, of letting his carefully constructed armor be cracked open by other people's pain. All right, he finally said. 20 million, and I'll attend the workshops. But I have one condition. What? Celeste attends too, and Miles. We all need to understand what we did. Seraphina looked at Miles, who looked terrified. At Celeste, who looked furious. At Vernon, who looked tired and genuinely ready to change. Deal, she said. Raphael will draw up the paperwork. And Vernon? Thank you. Not for the money, but for being willing to actually learn something. After they left, Vernon practically dragging a protesting Celeste toward the exit, while Miles trailed behind like a ghost, Elena appeared at Seraphina's elbow. What just happened? She asked. I think Vernon Barron just bought himself and his family some mandatory therapy, Seraphina said, and funded a program that might actually prevent other people from becoming like them. That was brilliant. That was exhausting. Seraphina accepted a glass of wine from a passing waiter and took a long drink. But maybe necessary. I can't undo what they did, but I can make sure it means something. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and connections. Donors wrote substantial checks. Survivors told their stories. The foundation became real in a way that went beyond paperwork and programs, becoming a community of people committed to helping others escape the patterns that had once trapped them. Near midnight, as the event was winding down, Seraphina found herself standing near the windows overlooking the Brooklyn waterfront. The Manhattan skyline glittered across the water like a crown of light, beautiful and cold. Quite a night, a voice said beside her. She turned to find a man she didn't recognize, tall, maybe 40, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He wore a suit that was nice but not designer, and carried himself with the confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. It was, she agreed carefully, her instincts immediately assessing him. Reporter? Corporate spy? Another person wanting something? "I'm Nathan Cross," he said, offering his hand. "I run a legal clinic in the Bronx. We've partnered with your foundation on several cases." "Oh." Saraphina shook his hand, relaxing slightly. "Your team does excellent work. The Reyes case last month was handled beautifully." "Thank you. Maria Reyes is doing well, by the way. She started her own business, a small bakery. Says helping other women find financial independence is her way of paying forward what your foundation did for her." "That's wonderful." Seraphina meant it. Stories like Maria's were why she'd built this. "I have to ask," Nathan said, his tone shifting to something more personal. "Why did you really do all this? The foundation, the gala, everything. You could have just stayed in your penthouse counting money. Why put yourself through reliving your own pain to help strangers?" It was the same question Elena had asked, but coming from Nathan, it felt different, less about validation and more about genuine curiosity. "Because the pain doesn't go away just because you ignore it," Seraphina said. "I tried hiding from who I was and it didn't work. So now I'm trying to transform who I was into something that might actually help people. Maybe that's selfish in its own way, using other people's healing to process my own. But at least it's honest." "I don't think it's selfish," Nathan said. "I think it's brave. And I think the people you're helping don't care whether your motives are complicated as long as the help is real." They talked for another hour, standing by the windows while the gala ended around them. Nathan told her about his work, about the systemic issues that kept people trapped in abusive situations, about his own journey from corporate law to advocacy work. Seraphina found herself relaxing, talking to him the way she used to talk to people when she was Lena Hart. Honestly, without calculation, just two people sharing ideas. It wasn't until he was leaving that she realized she'd enjoyed the conversation without once thinking about what he wanted from her or what his ulterior motives might be. Maybe because he'd approached her as a colleague rather than a billionaire. Maybe because, in the context of the foundation, they were equals working toward the same goals. "We should have coffee sometime," Nathan said as he was putting on his coat. "Talk about expanding the legal partnership. Your foundation is funding really innovative work, and I think we could do more together." "I'd like that," Seraphina said, and was surprised to find she meant it. After everyone left and the cleanup crew was breaking down the event, Seraphina stood in the empty warehouse and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd accomplished. The foundation was real. Vernon's donation, begrudging and complicated as it was, would fund programs that could genuinely help people. And for the first time since returning to New York, she felt like she was building something that mattered more than corporate victories or personal revenge. Raphael found her there, still in her gala gown, surrounded by empty tables and dimmed lights. "You should go home," he said gently. "Get some rest. This was a big night." "It was, wasn't it?" She smiled at him. "We actually did something good, Raphael. Not just strategically smart or financially sound. Actually good." "You did something good. I just helped with the paperwork." "Don't minimize your role. You've been with me through all of this. The disappearance, the return, the rebuilding. I couldn't have done any of it without you." Raphael's expression softened. "You know, when you first told me you wanted to become Lena Hart, I thought you were making a terrible mistake. Walking away from everything you'd built to play house with a stranger. But watching you tonight, seeing what you've created from the pain of that mistake, maybe it wasn't a waste after all." 7 years to learn that people are more than their usefulness is an expensive education, Seraphina said. But at least I'm putting the lessons to use. She went home that night and stood at her penthouse windows, looking out at the city that had witnessed both her downfall and her resurrection. Somewhere out there, Miles was probably awake too, thinking about the workshops Vernon had committed them to attending. Learning to recognize his own patterns, to see the damage he'd done. She didn't hate him anymore. Didn't even think about him much. He was just part of her story now, a necessary chapter that had led to this moment. The foundation was her future, not a replacement for human connection, but a foundation for it. A way to be powerful and purposeful, and maybe, eventually, find people who could see both sides of her and value both. People like Nathan Cross, who approached her as a partner rather than a prize. Like Elena Vance, who'd found courage in her story. Like all the survivors who were rebuilding their lives with the foundation's help. She wasn't fixed, wasn't healed, But she was building something real, something that mattered, something that transformed her expensive mistakes into resources for others. That was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The first workshop session happened 3 weeks after the gala in a community center in Queens that felt deliberately unglamorous. Saraphina had chosen the location specifically. She wanted Vernon, Celeste, and Miles to sit in folding chairs in a room with fluorescent lighting and scuffed linoleum, surrounded by people whose lives had been damaged by the same arrogance they'd displayed. She arrived early to help the facilitator set up, still uncertain whether Vernon would actually show. His donation had cleared within 48 hours of the gala, but money was easy. Walking into a room full of survivors and admitting you'd been part of the problem was something else entirely. But at exactly 6 p.m., Vernon walked through the door, alone. Celeste refused to come, he said without preamble, his usual polish stripped away to reveal something raw underneath. Miles is supposed to arrive separately. I didn't want to give either of them an excuse to back out by making it a group activity. I'm surprised you came, Saraphina admitted. So am I. Vernon looked around the room, taking in the circle of chairs and the survivors already gathering. But I made a commitment, and maybe it's time I actually kept one that didn't benefit me directly. The session was brutal in its honesty. The facilitator, a woman named Dr. Chen, who specialized in trauma recovery, created a space where survivors could share their experiences without judgment. Vernon sat rigid in his chair as woman after woman described relationships that sounded disturbingly similar to the dynamics he'd modeled in his own life. Relationships built on control, manipulation, and the fundamental belief that some people existed to serve others. When Dr. Chen asked if anyone wanted to respond to what they'd heard, Vernon surprised everyone by raising his hand. My name is Vernon Barron, he said, his voice unsteady. And I've spent my entire life treating people the way you've all described. Not physically abusive, not obviously cruel, but using people. Making them feel like their value came from what they could do for me. Teaching my daughter to do the same. He paused, seeming to gather courage. I don't know how to fix that, but I'm here to learn. The room was silent. Then a woman named Grace, who'd shared her story of leaving a 15-year marriage, spoke up. Why now? She asked. What changed? Vernon looked at Saraphina, who sat quietly in the back of the room. Someone I underestimated showed me what I'd become. And instead of destroying me when she could have, she gave me a chance to become something different. I'm trying not to waste it. Miles arrived halfway through the session, slipping in quietly and taking the last empty chair. He looked thinner than he had at the gala, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. When Dr. Chen invited him to introduce himself, he seemed to struggle with the words. I'm Miles Crow, he finally said. I was married to someone who loved me, and I threw her away because I thought I'd found something better. Turned out what I'd found was just another version of the same problem, using people to climb higher. His voice cracked. I don't know how to be different. I don't know if I can be. But I'm here because maybe learning to recognize what I did is the first step. The sessions became a weekly ritual. Vernon never missed one, showing up in increasingly casual clothing as the weeks progressed, as if he was shedding his corporate armor piece by piece. Miles came irregularly at first, then more consistently, his initial defensiveness slowly eroding into something that might have been genuine remorse. Celeste appeared exactly once, stayed for 20 minutes, and left in tears after a survivor named Keisha described how her ex-fiance's family had treated her like an acquisition rather than a person. Saraphina saw the recognition in Celeste's eyes. The moment she understood that she'd done exactly the same thing to Miles, pointed at him, and expected Daddy to acquire him like a luxury car. After Celeste fled, Vernon looked at Saraphina across the circle with something like gratitude and grief mixed together. Thank you, he mouthed. She nodded. Some lessons couldn't be taught, only experienced. Celeste would either process what she'd seen and change, or she wouldn't. That was her choice to make. Meanwhile, the foundation continued to grow. Saraphina spent her days in meetings with program directors, her evenings reviewing case files, and her rare free moments trying to figure out who she was now that she was neither Lena Hart nor the Ice Queen version of Saraphina Vale she'd been before her disappearance. Coffee with Nathan Cross became a weekly occurrence. They met at a small cafe in the village, halfway between her office and his clinic, and talked about expanding legal services and navigating bureaucratic challenges. But their conversations inevitably drifted beyond work. To books they'd read, places they'd traveled, the strange isolation that came with dedicating yourself to helping others when your own life felt unresolved. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked one afternoon, stirring sugar into his third coffee. "Walking away from your old life, becoming Lena Hart." "Every day," Saraphina said honestly, "but not for the reasons you'd think. I don't regret leaving the corporate world. I regret that I felt I had to erase myself completely to find something real. Like I couldn't imagine being both powerful and authentically connected. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out if those things can coexist. If I can be honest about who I am, all of it, the power and the damage and everything in between, and still have relationships that aren't transactional." Nathan smiled. "For what it's worth, this feels pretty authentic to me. Two people who care about the same work, drinking overpriced coffee and talking about ideas, no agenda, no manipulation, just connection." "Is that what this is?" Saraphina asked, genuinely uncertain. "I think so, unless you've been secretly plotting to acquire my clinic this whole time." She laughed, surprised by how easy it felt. "Your clinic is safe. I'm trying very hard not to acquire things anymore. Just build them." Their friendship, because that's what it was becoming, Saraphina realized, felt different from anything she'd experienced as either version of herself. Nathan knew who she was, knew her history, and treated her like a colleague with interesting ideas rather than a trophy to collect or a problem to solve. There was no performance required, no careful calibration of which parts of herself to reveal and which to hide. It was terrifying. It was also wonderful. 3 months after the foundation launch, Raphael requested an urgent meeting. He arrived at her penthouse with the expression he wore when something significant had shifted in the world. "Vernon Barron resigned from his company this morning," Raphael said, pulling up news articles on his tablet. "Stepped down as CEO, gave up his board seat. Everything. He's keeping a minority stake but relinquishing operational control." Saraphina read the official statement, noting the careful language about pursuing new priorities and dedicating time to philanthropic work. Reading between the lines, she saw something else. A man who'd looked at what he'd built and decided it wasn't worth the cost. "There's more," Raphael continued. "Miles Crow was let go 2 weeks ago. Officially, it's described as a mutual parting of ways, but sources say the board wanted him gone. Too much scandal, too much association with Vernon's fall from grace. And Celeste? Broke off the engagement a month ago. She's apparently living in Paris, working for some fashion house, running away from everything that happened here." Saraphina absorbed this information, trying to identify what she felt. Not triumph. The destruction of their lives gave her no pleasure, not even satisfaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes consequences arrived slowly, accumulating until they became unavoidable. "Miles tried to call you yesterday," Raphael added carefully. "I had the service block it, but I wanted you to know." What could he possibly want now? Probably forgiveness or absolution. People like Miles always want someone to tell them they're not really as bad as their actions suggest. "He won't get that from me." Saraphina stood and walked to her windows, looking out at the city where she'd rebuilt her life. "But I hope he finds it somewhere. I hope he actually changes, actually learns something from all this. Because if he doesn't, then what was the point?" "The point was justice," Raphael said firmly. "He hurt you, and there were consequences. That matters." "Maybe. But I'm tired of caring about Miles Crow's consequences. I just want him to become someone different so he doesn't do to someone else what he did to me." That evening, Saraphina did something she'd been avoiding for months. She wrote a letter to Miles. Not an email or text that could be forwarded and weaponized, but an actual letter on paper, something private and final. She didn't draft it or overthink it. She just wrote what she needed to say. "Miles, I know you've been trying to reach me. I understand that you want something from me. Forgiveness, closure, maybe just confirmation that you're not entirely irredeemable. I can't give you those things. What happened between us wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior that revealed who you really are when you think someone has nothing to offer you. That's not something I can absolve you of, but I can tell you this. The workshops you've been attending are working. I've seen the reports, heard from the facilitators. You're actually listening, actually processing what you did. That matters. Not for me, but for whoever comes after me in your life. Keep going. Keep learning. Keep becoming someone different than who you were. As for forgiveness, I'm working on that, but not for your benefit, for mine. Because carrying anger at you is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy than resent someone who's already irrelevant to my future. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. Just find it somewhere else. We're done. Saraphina. She sealed the letter, addressed it. Care of Vernon's Foundation contact, and dropped it in the mail before she could reconsider. Then she went to dinner with Nathan, who'd invited her to try a new restaurant in Brooklyn that donated its profits to food security programs. They talked about the foundation's expansion plans, about a complex custody case Nathan's clinic was handling, about everything and nothing. Somewhere between the appetizers and dessert, Saraphina realized she was happy. Not euphoric or healed or whole, but genuinely content in a moment that had nothing to do with corporate victories or personal revenge. You're smiling, Nathan observed. That's new? Is it? Saraphina touched her face, surprised to find he was right. You usually look like you're solving complex equations in your head. This is different, lighter. Maybe I'm finally figuring out the equation, which is how to be myself without armor, how to have power without using it as a weapon, how to connect with people without either hiding who I am or leading with my fortune. She paused, then added honestly, how to trust that someone might value me for reasons that have nothing to do with what I can give them. Nathan set down his fork and looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. For what it's worth, I figured out the answer to that one months ago, which is, you're brilliant, complicated, funny when you let yourself be, and genuinely committed to making a difference. That's worth knowing. That's worth spending time with. Everything else, the money, the power, the dramatic backstory, is just context. Saraphina felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the simple honesty of his words. No performance, no calculation. Just a man telling her she mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with her utility. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me, all of me, and not running. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. Why would I run? This is the most interesting friendship I've had in years, possibly ever. Friendship, Saraphina repeated, testing the word. For now, Nathan said carefully. Unless you'd like it to be something else, eventually, when you're ready. She thought about that. About the possibility of building something real with someone who'd seen her at her most complicated and stayed anyway. About what it might mean to trust someone with not just her story, but her future. I'd like that, she said. Eventually, when I'm ready. Take your time, Nathan said, squeezing her hand. I'm not going anywhere. 6 months after the foundation launch, Saraphina stood in an art gallery in Chelsea. Surrounded by paintings from emerging artists, the foundation had sponsored through its creative recovery program. The work was raw and powerful, each piece telling a story of survival and transformation. She was studying a particularly striking abstract piece when she felt someone approach. It's beautiful, isn't it? A voice said. Saraphina turned to find a woman in her early 30s, with paint-stained hands and the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were. It is, Saraphina agreed. Do you know the artist? I am the artist. The woman extended her hand. Maya Santos, this is my first show. Saraphina Vale, congratulations, your work is incredible. I know who you are, Maya said softly. Your foundation's grant program gave me the resources to leave my ex-husband and start painting again. He'd convinced me I had no talent, that art was a hobby for people who didn't have to worry about real life. Turned out he was just scared of what I might become if I actually pursued it. And what did you become? Maya smiled and gestured at the gallery walls covered in her work. This. Someone who makes things instead of making myself small. Someone who turns pain into beauty instead of letting it destroy her. Someone free. Saraphina felt her throat tighten. This was what the foundation was for. Not just helping people escape, but helping them become whoever they were meant to be before someone else convinced them to be less. "I'm so glad we could help," she said. "You did more than help. You showed me that being powerful and being honest aren't mutually exclusive, that I could have both if I was brave enough." Maya paused, then added, "I read about what happened to you, about Miles Crow and your 7 years as Lena Hart. It helped me understand that even smart, strong women can get trapped. That it's not weakness to believe in someone who turns out not to deserve it. It's just human." Thank you for saying that. Thank you for surviving it, for turning it into something that helps people like me. Maya glanced across the gallery to where Nathan was examining another painting. "Is that your partner? He's been staring at that piece for 10 minutes. "He's a friend," Saraphina said, then corrected herself. "Actually, he's becoming more than that. We're taking it slow." Good. Slow is good. Slow means you're building something real instead of rushing toward an illusion. After Maya moved on to greet other guests, Saraphina joined Nathan in front of the painting he'd been studying. It was called Reconstruction, a mixed media piece that showed a figure being built from fragments of broken things, shattered glass, torn paper, pieces of mirror that reflected light in unexpected ways. "This one speaks to me," Nathan said quietly. "The idea that you can build something beautiful from broken pieces, that the breaking isn't the end of the story." "Just the middle," Seraphina said, slipping her hand into his. "The hard part before the rebuilding." He turned to look at her, and she saw in his eyes the same thing she felt: possibility. Not certainty, not a guarantee that this would work, or that neither of them would get hurt. Just the genuine possibility of building something real with someone who saw all her broken pieces and thought they were worth reassembling. "I'm ready," she said. "For what?" "For more than friendship. For trying something real. For trusting someone with more than just my story." Nathan's smile was like sunrise. "Are you sure? We can keep taking it slow." "I've been taking it slow for 8 months. I think I've earned the right to jump." She pulled him closer, feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. "Just promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll tell me if this stops working, if I'm too much or not enough, or if you wake up one day and realize you signed up for someone less complicated. Promise me honesty, even when it hurts. I promise, on one condition, which is, you do the same. No hiding, no performing, no making yourself smaller to make me comfortable. I want all of it, the brilliant billionaire and the woman who cried over burned candles, the corporate warrior and the person trying to figure out how to be vulnerable. All of it." Seraphina felt tears spill over because someone was asking for all of her, not in spite of her complexity, but because of it, asking her to show up completely instead of choosing which version of herself was acceptable. "Deal," she whispered, and kissed him right there in the gallery, surrounded by art made from broken things transformed into beauty. The final workshop session happened on a cold January evening, almost a year after Seraphina's dramatic reappearance at the charity gala. Vernon had attended every single session, his transformation visible in the way he carried himself. Less armor, more humanity. Miles had missed a few, but shown up more often than not, slowly learning to recognize his patterns and sit with his own discomfort. Dr. Chen opened the final session with a question. "What has this year taught you?" Vernon spoke first. "That power without accountability is just cruelty with resources. That I spent decades hurting people while telling myself it was just business. That my daughter learned to be exactly like me, and I'm not sure I can fix that. But I'm trying." A survivor named Jennifer, who'd shared her story in the very first session, responded, "You can't fix your daughter. She has to fix herself. But you showing up here week after week, admitting what you did, that matters. My ex-husband never did that, never acknowledged the damage. You're doing something he couldn't, and that means something." Miles went last. "I learned that I don't know how to love people without using them, that I thought marriage was about what someone could do for my life instead of building a life together, that I'm still learning the difference." He looked directly at Seraphina, who'd attended this final session specifically to hear what he'd say. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm sorry, and I'm trying to become someone who wouldn't do it again." Seraphina felt nothing looking at him. No anger, no pain, no satisfaction in his obvious misery. Just a distant acknowledgement that this person had once been important to her and now was simply someone she used to know. "I forgive you," she said, surprising herself. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to stop carrying anger at someone who doesn't matter anymore. You're not my husband. You're not even my enemy. You're just someone I used to know who taught me expensive lessons, and I'm done paying tuition." After the session ended, Vernon approached her in the parking lot. "I never thanked you properly," he said, "for giving me this chance, for not destroying me when you could have." "I didn't give you anything, Vernon. You chose to show up. You chose to learn. That was all you. Still, my empire is smaller now. My reputation is damaged. My daughter won't speak to me, but I sleep better at night than I have in 30 years. That's worth something." "What will you do now?" Saraphina asked. "I'm starting a consulting firm. Pro bono work helping small businesses navigate finance without getting crushed by people like I used to be. It won't make me a billionaire, but maybe it'll make me someone worth being." "Good luck," Saraphina said, and meant it. She drove back to Manhattan feeling lighter than she had in months. The past year had been about transformation, not just for the foundation or the people it helped, but for herself. She'd gone from Lena Hart trying to hide from power to Saraphina Vale wielding it like a weapon to someone in between, learning to be powerful and vulnerable simultaneously. Nathan was waiting at her penthouse when she arrived, having used the key she'd given him 3 months ago when they'd stopped pretending this was casual. "How was the final session?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Closure-y," she said against his chest. "Vernon's actually changed. Miles is trying. I forgave them both and discovered I meant it. That's huge. It is. And I couldn't have done it without this," she gestured between them, "without knowing that I could be all of myself with someone and have them stay. That made it safe to let go of the anger." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "For the record, I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Promise?" "Promise. Even when you're impossible, even when you work 16-hour days and forget to eat, even when you're brilliant and terrifying and make me feel like I'm dating a force of nature." "You are dating a force of nature," Saraphina said, smiling against his shirt. "I know. It's my favorite thing about you." They stood there in her penthouse overlooking the city that had witnessed every version of her, and Saraphina felt something she hadn't felt since before she'd become Lena Hart, complete. Not perfect, not undamaged, but whole in a way that included all her broken pieces and sharp edges. The foundation thrived. The programs expanded to 4 more cities. Maya Santos's art show sold out, with half the proceeds donated back to the Creative Recovery Program. Patricia found a job she loved and started dating someone who treated her like she mattered. Maria Reyes Bakery became successful enough to hire 3 employees, all of them women escaping their own difficult situations. Vernon's pro bono consulting helped 17 small businesses avoid predatory lending. Miles started volunteering at a youth center, teaching financial literacy to kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. Celeste stayed in Paris, and according to reports, was slowly learning to build an identity that wasn't based on daddy's money. And Saraphina learned to be happy. Not the shallow happiness of corporate victories or the desperate happiness of thinking ordinary could be enough. Real happiness, complicated and hard-won, built on honesty and purpose, and relationships that didn't require her to choose between power and connection. She and Nathan moved in together after 8 months, choosing a brownstone in Brooklyn that felt like neutral territory. Not her penthouse where Saraphina Vale had lived in isolation, not his modest apartment where he'd built his advocacy work, but something new they could build together. Raphael attended their housewarming party and pulled Saraphina aside. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "When you first told me you wanted to become Lena Hart, I thought you were running from yourself. Turns out you were running towards something. You just had to go through hell to find it." "Was it worth it?" Saraphina asked. 7 years with Miles, all that pain, everything that happened. Raphael considered that. Would you be here without it? Would you have built the foundation, found Nathan, figured out how to be whole? Probably not. Then maybe it was worth it. Not because the pain was good, but because you transformed it into something that matters. That's alchemy, Saraphina. That's rare. 2 years after her dramatic return to New York society, Saraphina stood on stage at the Foundation's anniversary gala. The event had grown, twice as many people, 3 times the funding, 10 times the impact. But the mission remained the same, helping people escape manipulation and rebuild themselves into whoever they were meant to be. 2 years ago, I came back from 7 years in hiding, she told the crowd. I tried to escape myself, tried to find love by erasing everything that made me powerful. It didn't work, but the failure taught me something crucial, that the answer isn't to hide your power or weaponize it. The answer is to use it honestly, for things that matter, with people who see all of you and stay anyway. She looked at Nathan in the front row, at Raphael beside him, at Elena coordinating the event, at the survivors scattered throughout the crowd who'd become colleagues and friends. The Meridian Foundation exists because I learned that pain only matters if you transform it. That being broken only matters if you let the breaking destroy you instead of remake you. We're all made of fragments, shattered glass and torn paper, and pieces of mirror that catch light in unexpected ways. The question isn't whether we'll break. The question is what we'll build from the pieces. The applause was thunderous, but Saraphina barely heard it. She was too busy looking at the life she'd built from her own broken pieces, the community she'd created from her expensive mistakes, the future spreading out before her like a promise she was finally ready to keep. After the gala, she and Nathan walked along the Brooklyn waterfront, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the water. "Do you ever miss it?" Nathan asked. "The corporate world, the power games, the version of yourself that terrified people." "Sometimes," Saraphina admitted, "but then I remember why I left. That version of me was powerful but empty, successful but alone. She had everything except the things that actually mattered. And now? Now I have work that matters, people who see me and you." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I have a life I built honestly, instead of one I inherited or one I performed. That's worth more than all the corporate victories I ever won." Nathan pulled her close, and they stood there on the waterfront, while the city lights reflected on the water like stars that had fallen and learned to swim. "I love you," he said. "All of you. The brilliant billionaire and the woman who hid herself for 7 years, and the person you're becoming, all of it." "I love you too," Saraphina said, and meant it completely. She'd gone from Saraphina Vale, who trusted no one, to Lena Hart, who trusted too easily, to someone in between, someone who could be powerful and vulnerable, guarded and open, wealthy and genuine. Someone who'd learned that the opposite of hiding wasn't revealing everything. It was choosing carefully who deserved your truth and trusting them with it completely. Miles Crow had taught her what she didn't want. Vernon Barron had shown her what unchecked power became. But Nathan, the foundation, the life she'd built from broken pieces, they taught her what was possible when you stopped performing and started becoming. The past was sealed. Miles and Celeste were irrelevant, their story finished. Vernon was rebuilding himself into someone better. The empire Saraphina had abandoned was thriving under management that understood power was a tool, not an identity. And Saraphina herself was finally completely free. Free from the need to hide or prove anything. Free from the weight of 7 wasted years because they weren't wasted anymore. They were transformed into purpose and programs and people whose lives were genuinely better. She stood on the waterfront with Nathan's arms around her and felt the last piece of her story click into place. Not happily ever after, because life was more complicated than fairy tales. But honestly ever after. Purposefully ever after. Wholly, completely, authentically herself ever after. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything.